The day the sky caught fire. The true story of the Great Peshtigo Inferno. If you think the deadliest disaster in American history was an earthquake in California, or a hurricane on the Gulf Coast, or even a terrorist attack in New York, you would be wrong. On the same night that the Great Chicago Fire began, October 8, 1871, a wall of flame taller than a cathedral moved across northeastern Wisconsin at hurricane speed, turning forests into torches, rivers into boiling traps, and entire towns into ash in a matter of hours. By morning, more than 1,000 Americans were dead, and most of the country never truly heard about it. This is the story of the Great Peshtigo Fire, the deadliest wildfire in United States history, and the forgotten American town that vanished beneath a sky of fire. In 1871, America was only 6 years removed from the Civil War. The nation was rebuilding, expanding, industrializing. Railroads stitched together distant states. Lumber fueled growth, homes, bridges, factories, ships. And nowhere was the lumber industry more aggressive than in the forests of Wisconsin. The town of Peshtigo sat near the Peshtigo River in northeastern Wisconsin, about 60 miles north of Green Bay. It was a hard-working lumber town, sawmills humming, axes swinging, trains hauling massive logs toward booming cities. The forest seemed endless. White pine trees stretched toward the horizon. Logging camps dotted the wilderness. And like many frontier communities, fire was considered a tool, not a threat. Loggers regularly used controlled burns to clear brush and dispose of debris. Farmers did the same to open land for crops. Small fires smoldered constantly across the region during dry seasons. It was common practice, necessary practice. But 1871 had been brutally dry. Rain had been scarce for months. The summer heat baked the land. Fallen branches, sawdust, and logging scraps littered the forest floor like kindling. Then came the wind. In early October, a powerful cold front moved across the Midwest. It carried fierce, sustained winds that whipped through Wisconsin's forests at extraordinary speeds. Small, scattered fires, once manageable, began to merge. By October 8th, the air itself felt charged. Witnesses later described strange conditions: animals fleeing in unnatural silence, smoke hanging thick in the distance, the sky turning an eerie yellow by afternoon. That evening, as families in Peshtigo prepared supper and children drifted toward sleep, the wind intensified. Then, somewhere in the forest, the separate fires converged. What happened next would later be described as a firestorm. A firestorm is not simply a large fire. It is a self-feeding atmospheric monster. When intense heat rises rapidly, it pulls in oxygen from all directions, creating inward winds that can exceed 100 miles per hour. The fire creates its own weather. In Peshtigo, the temperature soared to an estimated 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit in places. Flames leapt across the river. Trees exploded. Entire blocks ignited at once. Residents later reported hearing a sound like a freight train approaching. But no train was scheduled. It was the roar of oxygen being sucked into the inferno. Within minutes, the town was engulfed. Wooden buildings offered no defense. Sparks landed on rooftops and ignited them instantly. Sawmills, packed with dry lumber, became bombs of flame. Some residents tried to flee by wagon. The wind overturned them. Roads vanished in smoke so thick people could not see their own hands. Others ran toward the Peshtigo River. The river became both refuge and trap. Hundreds waded into the water to escape the heat, but the fire consumed oxygen so rapidly that many suffocated even before flames reached them. The water itself grew hot. Survivors clung to logs, to each other, to anything that floated. Some accounts describe whirlwinds of fire, literal tornadoes of flame, lifting burning debris high into the air and hurling it across town. One priest, Father Peter Pernin, later wrote that the fire moved with inconceivable rapidity, turning night into a glowing apocalypse. Families were separated in seconds. Entire neighborhoods vanished in less than an hour. By midnight, Peshtigo was gone. But Peshtigo was not alone. The fire spread across approximately 1.2 million acres, an area nearly twice the size of Rhode Island. At least a dozen towns were destroyed or severely damaged, including Brussels, Sugarbush, and Williamsonville. In Williamsonville, nearly every resident perished. In some places, survivors were found days later, wandering in shock, clothes burned from their bodies, unable to speak. The official death toll is often listed between 1,200 and 2,500 people, but no one knows the true number. Many records burned. Entire families were erased without documentation. It remains the deadliest wildfire in American history. Yet it happened on the same night as the Great Chicago Fire. Chicago, a booming city of nearly 300,000 people, caught fire late on October 8th as well. The legend of Mrs. O'Leary's cow may be apocryphal, but the destruction was real. Chicago's fire consumed 4 square miles of city. National newspapers focused on Chicago. It was larger. It was economically vital. It was politically visible. Peshtigo, by contrast, was a lumber town on the frontier. Telegraph lines had burned. Few journalists reached the area quickly. By the time detailed reports emerged, Chicago's tragedy had already dominated headlines. And so Peshtigo became America's forgotten catastrophe. But survivors never forgot. In the days following the fire, relief efforts were chaotic. Green Bay sent supplies. Milwaukee contributed aid. But disease threatened survivors, who were burned, homeless, and traumatized. Winter was approaching. Rebuilding had to begin immediately. Mass graves were dug. Some bodies were never identified. The smell of smoke lingered for weeks. Yet even amid devastation, resilience appeared. Residents rebuilt sawmills. New homes rose from ashes. The forests, though scarred, would eventually grow back. Over time, scientific understanding of firestorms improved. Investigators believe the intense winds from the cold front combined with superheated air to create cyclonic fire behavior, an early documented example of what we now recognize in modern megafires. Today, climate scientists study the Peshtigo fire as a warning. Dry conditions, fuel accumulation, high winds. All the ingredients still exist. In the Peshtigo Fire Museum, artifacts remain: melted glass, warped metal, personal belongings fused by heat. They are quiet witnesses to a night when the sky turned into an engine of destruction. If you visit Peshtigo today, it is peaceful. Green trees line the river. Children play in parks. You would never guess that on one October night in 1871, the air itself became lethal. The tragedy teaches several truths. First, nature does not require modern technology to devastate civilization. Second, history does not always remember proportionally. And third, ordinary communities often endure extraordinary suffering in silence. When Americans speak of historic disasters, Chicago is remembered. Peshtigo is often a footnote. But in terms of lives lost, the Wisconsin fire was far worse. The town that vanished did not disappear because it was small. It disappeared because the story competed with a larger city's flames. And so the dead of Peshtigo became shadows behind a brighter blaze. Yet, their story remains, carved into the soil of Wisconsin. It remains in mass graves and memorial plaques. It remains in the lessons firefighters carry today. On October 8, 1871, the Midwest burned in multiple places. But in one small lumber town by a river, the fire did not simply spread. It hunted. It roared. It consumed. And for a few unimaginable hours, the sky caught fire. That night proved something America would relearn many times over. When wind, drought, and flame align, no frontier is strong enough. And sometimes, the deadliest disasters are the ones history almost forgets.